Taiwan has always been really passionate about freedom.
It's the longest running Pride parade in Asia.
For me, Pride represents really stepping into your own life.
Pride means love.
There's still like more than half of the countries are not having this kind of basic rights for LGBT people.
As a society, people are becoming more embracing of diversity and approach it from a perspective of understanding.
Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Divya Gopalan. Now, Taiwan has proven itself a trendsetter in LGBTQ+ rights in the region, especially when it comes to activism and legislation. Recently, Taipei held its annual Pride Parade, which not only had one of the biggest turnouts in history, but also saw an impressive number of visitors and supporters from overseas. But while Taiwan has made great strides in fighting for equal rights, there still is an ongoing battle for the hearts and minds of the general public. So we ask, where are we in the ever-evolving journey for the LGBTQ+ community to gain equality and acceptance? And to get a perspective on changing times and societies, we're joined from southern France by Xiaogang Wei, who is director and founder of the webinar Queer Comrades, and Olivia Wu here in Taipei, director and co-founder of Asia Rainbow Ride. Thank you both so much for joining us. Now, I'm going to start with you, Xiaogang, and talk about the work you do as a director and filmmaker. Can you tell us about the type of advocacy work and how it helps the LGBTQ+ community?
I started this organization just because in that time there's not much like a presentation of LGBT people in front of the camera. I think because people are always hear like, oh, LGBT people, gay people, lesbian people, they're kind of like people always have their imagination of like those people must look like sick or weird or like definitely look not like us. So in that moment, actually, I wanted just presenting like queer people actually is queer as a comrade, like queer as folk, just like, queer people everywhere. They probably look like different from you, but they also can look like just the people around you. So that's the idea of starting this kind of like a webcast.
Olivia, you two are all about bringing more visibility to the community, but you're doing that through Rainbow Ride. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. So the Rainbow Ride is a charity bike ride that circles northern parts of Taiwan. And what we try to do is do advocacy and visibility through Taipei and also into the region that we cycle into.
Very interesting. Xiaogang, this year's Pride, and bringing it back to the big event that's just happened, was one of the most attended in Taiwan's history, both by locals and by foreign visitors. Can you tell us what kind of a message that brings or that's giving about Taiwan?
I think because even now, like a lot queer people inside the core community says, do we still need Pride? But when I really look around what's happening around the world, I think the Pride is still really important because there's still like more than half of the countries are not having this kind of basic rights for LGBT people. And I think that to only have the one day to standing out and to tell people who we are, what we look, what do we want, I think it's still quite important. I think, especially Taiwan still having this platform in Asia, like, all people can join this big walk. I think for me is still very political, very important, like a day. Yeah.
And Olivia, going back to Rainbow Ride, you do this in tandem with Pride, and why is that?
So in the beginning, when we designed the ride, we really wanted to be a Pride Month celebration where they could travel into Taiwan. They joined the ride for 3 days. They'd sightsee Taiwan and, participate in Pride.
Well, this year's Pride made diversity and inclusion its central theme. We spoke to some of the people who traveled to Taiwan to experience Asia's largest and longest running LGBTQ+ event.
My name is Yo. I'm from Vienna, Austria.
My name's Anne. I'm from Australia, but I live in Hong Kong.
And I'm Shannon. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm from the U.S., but I live in Bangkok.
Hi, my name is Tori Wyndham. I'm from the US. I've been in Taiwan 7 years now.
We are both from Cape Town, South Africa.
My name is Francis.
And I'm Craig.
And together we are Two Tons of Fun.
Pride, this one day a year, is a day that we welcome anyone to come out and be who it is that they are.
Pride represents for me just respect between the people, you know. It's still not secure that you can go openly hand in hand with your partner and so on. We need to show ourselves, we need to show our pride, we need to show how we live in freedom. As the name says, Two Tons of Fun, we're representing fun, but we also know that pride is about so much more. It's about diversity and about love and just spreading love and awareness.
For me, pride represents really stepping into your own light, being yourself, because a lot of queer people, we feel like we cannot be ourselves. So pride is just being there, being loud and proud, saying it out to people who don't feel comfortable being themselves. They can be like, I see that guy, he's working it, I want to be like him.
What does pride mean for me? Love. Pride means love.
And I think especially in Asia, Taiwan can be a good example how other societies can develop for a free world.
It's the longest running Pride parade in Asia and the biggest in Asia.
I mean, this is amazing. I mean, we live in our parts of the world, we don't have something like this sort of set up. We're getting ready for the gay games in Hong Kong, like starting next weekend. And I would say it's, it's not getting as much press or attention as this. So this feels like an amazing space.
In Taiwan, Pride has always been more of a protest or a peaceful protest than just the kind of carnival party you might see in other places. Now, in Taiwan, as everyone knows, we were the first nation to legalize same-sex marriage in 2019. And a lot of people, both here in Taiwan and from other countries, believe that Taiwan LGBT plus Pride had a big hand in helping that along.
I mean, you can look around, and it's fabulous, and we'll celebrate, and it still feels very welcoming and inclusive. But if you look around, you will see the majority of people here are probably identify as cis gay men.
There's nothing specifically for lesbians or bi women or queer women.
Yeah.
And it feels a little bit like we're being left out of the story.
So this year, we're hoping that those in the non-binary community and the trans community can be more seen, and that other people can come out and realize that it's not just one or the other. It's a giant spectrum, like a rainbow.
Now, Xiaogang, we saw people be able to express themselves at the parade, stepping into your own light, as Two Tons of Fun put it. What would you say stops people from being their authentic selves?
Oh, I think there's I'm just to start this one thing. Even Taiwan has a longest pride history in Asia and legalized the same-sex marriage. But I read this one report, actually, they have this research on coming out. I think in Taiwan, the coming out rate is still very low, because I think it's still a lot of people carry on the family pressure, and even especially coming out in the workplace in Taiwan also is very, very difficult. Most people are coming out to their kind of more like a private, a friend circle. That's kind of much easier now. But to coming out in the workplace, coming out in the family in Taiwan is still a big struggle for a lot of people. Yeah. So I think from that you can see sometimes, marriage and legalized marriage and the pride is not enough for us. I think this is why we have to keep not just, or I think sometimes pride is important, is not just celebrate, is really importantly still holding this political a reform. We have to ask the government, we have to ask people to really know what we wanted.
And give us a sense of what kind of family dynamics and community support there is, particularly with the work you're doing, because what you're trying to do is, as you had described it to me previously, is the softer approach. Can you explain that?
Sure. I would like to call it soft activism. So approach it from a holistic view with healing, recreating narratives, and creating abundance within oneself. So living truly, in essence, in your own light. And by doing that, we are embracing ourselves and guiding the narrative of how we choose to live. And by that, this is how we show up in the world.
And how much of a divide is there, Olivia, between the urban areas where we're seeing all these big events happen, a lot of the attention, and Taiwan's rural areas, which perhaps could be more conservative?
I do see that, but I see a hopeful narrative happening where people are very open to understanding and people want to engage. For example, on the ride, we cycle through different parts of Taiwan. And this year we went into Taoyuan, where it could be more rural areas. But, when people see like pride flags happening and it looks like a celebration, people are excited, they get curious, they ask about it, they hear that it's a charity event for diversity and inclusion. They're just really friendly about us cycling through these areas.
And Xiaogang, as someone who's lived in several different countries and perhaps advocated in other countries too, give us an idea of the idea of integration, which for Taiwan is, I think, the next, many of the communities say it's the next step. Once you've got the legislation in place, the next step would be integrating into society where it becomes a more natural process.
Sometimes I think in Taiwan, a lot of NGO getting too close to the government because they want to have a government's support. But I think the job is sometimes not just getting the support, not getting the recognition. I think our job is always supervise the government, what they do. Because the government is always changing. They're not the one of the things, because they're every 4 years, 5 years, they're changing people, their mind is changing. So I think that as activists, we always have to make sure we're watching their every movement, and we have to give them the critical about everything they do or everything they doesn't do. So I think keep this in mind. I think for me, I think for all activists around Asia, everywhere, it's quite important.
Xiaogang, actually, I'm really glad you brought up the role of the government here, because, as you know, Taiwan's presidential elections are coming up, and there is a lot of focus on the issues and the progress that can still be made for the LGBTQ+ community. In fact, the ruling party, DPP's vice president, who is running in this year's election for the top job, was at the recent Pride Parade saying that he stands with the community. But in reality, given that the conservative resistance typically runs deep, how much have elections really done to help advance LGBTQ+ rights? And we put that question to Howard Zhang. He's a professor in Taiwan Cultural Studies at UC Santa Barbara.
So what I can say is that superficially, right, on the surface, one could say that you can take at the face value that the legalization of same-sex marriage happened during DPP's reign. And so in many ways, election might have some impact on how progressive sexual politics might pan out. And it's not as if gay marriage is something that all of us consider to be the most radical thing in the world. On the other hand, it's also true, right? I think Ma Ying-jeou serving as the Taipei's mayor was actually pretty fundamental for having Taiwan to be the host of the first gay pride parade in the Sinophone world. So it's not so clear-cut. So we know that a lot of the rise of the Tongzhi or gay lesbian movement crucially relied on the democratization of Taiwanese society in the late 1980s onward. And it was actually the Kuomintang leaders' very proactive stance in not just lifting the martial law, but also their policy towards democratization that really gave the political space for the rise of a kind of social and cultural consciousness coalescing around queer citizenship. And this, of course, coincided with the rise of the feminist movement, the environmental activism, indigenous movement, as well as labor activism. So all of these kind of blossomed from the 1990s onward. And I do think that that had a lot to do with the growing power of the DPP party. So I think it's a bit more complicated than just relying on the pure election alone to say that that would be the ultimate kind of barometer for the future hope of sexual queer LGBTQ movement.
Right, and realistically speaking, how much can Taiwan's progress have a ripple effect in the region here. In fact, in many countries, we're actually seeing them roll back rights and even democratic rights to a certain extent. So given your historical perspective, can you see that Taiwan's spreading the kind of progress we're seeing here?
From a historical perspective, I feel very conflicted. And let me just preface by saying that, I work in a country where they even overturned abortion rights. For decades, we thought that was a given. So everything seems to be, we just cannot take anything for granted anymore. One of the interesting, I think, historical coincidence was that the democratization of Taiwanese society and the rise of the gay and lesbian movement, queer movement in Taiwan, I do think coincided also with the rise of a new conservative movement around the world. As you said, there are also other places in Asia that are not only rolling back gay rights, but also rolling back the whole apparatus of democratic governance. So I feel very conflicted on this question in the sense that I can't really predict that whether Taiwan will have an absolute ripple effect across the region. I will say, though, that sometimes it is more difficult for legislatures, for policymakers to take back something that they had already legalized. That's often the case, but that's always not necessarily to be the case as well.
So, Olivia, so many things to pick up on here, but I want to start with basically the last thing Howard said there about how difficult it is, or it could be more difficult for policymakers, particularly in Taiwan, to undo changes. Now, do you feel confident that Taiwan will keep moving forward? You already mentioned to me at some point that you feel like the hard work with the legislation has already been done.
I do see Taiwan as a beacon of hope for Asia, whereas, the fight for freedom, it's continuous. And regardless of which state we are in, there is always more work that we could do. And I do see right now, as a society, people are becoming more embracing of diversity and approach it from a perspective of understanding.
Right, but do you feel that the next step now here in advocacy, and Taiwan has done kind of put into place the apparatus it needs to allow that positive change to happen, and now the next step in advocacy would be to engage the wider society and public?
I do see that now it's a time for Taiwan to bridge to international audiences as a way to channel and then see and to showcase the work and how we could grow and develop the movement as a whole. So I do see a positive motion forward.
All right, so I want to pick up on another point that Howard made, Xiaogang, and this is about rolling back rights. And China is a prime example of that. You were one of the board members of the Beijing LGBT Center, which sadly has been shut down. Can you talk to us a little bit about the shrinking space we're seeing in China?
I think first, Beijing LGBT Center was not really shut down. I think they decided to close. I think, of course, there's behind the reason we know why they want to close down the organization. I think it's just a lot of pressure, and to kind of talk about the shrinking space is not really particularly just for LGBT. It's not like they're only targeting LGBT. I would say, I think in China, it's there's been years. They've been targeting the civil society, human rights workers space. I think in the beginning, with the human rights lawyers and labor this kind of organization. I think a feminist feminist organization. So I think now and after all this. Things are being shut down, LGBT become more and more visible. I think now, of course, LGBT, they start also focus on a little bit on the LGBT organization. So that's how, I think for my eyes, this is how that happened. It's not particularly just a focus on one group, but just because the whole civil society, the NGO, the idea for them, to fighting for the fighting for human rights. I think in Chinese government ways, like you can do all the things, but you have to in their way, because they want to do everything themselves. But if you do with them, is good. But if you do without them or like by criticize them, it is just not going to work.
So as we said, like activism takes all kinds of forms, doesn't it? It depends on the environment and the society you're working with. Now, to bring it back to Taiwan, I mean, Taiwan is not a member of many of the international bodies, sadly not recognized. Olivia, what do you think Taiwan, or how do you think Taiwan can do its progress in LGBTQ rights for its image across the world and to kind of spread its message and influence and perhaps in the LGBTQ plus community?
Sure. I feel like Taiwan has always been really passionate about freedom. And then that includes the freedom to live with our own identity. And by voicing it, the community brings about a perspective that really opens up possibilities for the society that we could create. And I see this as a representative of, how Taiwan could show up in world narratives. And it's exactly with this idea that, this is an island that we could create our own narratives where we can also create the possibilities and potential that it could be.
One of the things we see here in Taiwan, of course, is, as we've said, legislation and changes for the situation for much of the LGBTQ plus community. And it seems recently it's more about family building. We're talking about same-sex marriage, adoption. But what about the other parts of the LGBT community that perhaps don't get that much attention, the transgender rights, and how much work is being done in that arena? And do you feel that there can be more to be done?
I think so, because I feel like the path to self-discovery and self-identity, it's a continuous process. So there is always more that we are learning about ourselves. And the more that we do these self-discovery, the more that we could voice who we are. And I do feel like Taiwan is very inclusive as a whole. We see Pride, we see Pride-related events happening where all of these narratives are bringing about in it, such as adoption rights, transnational marriages, trans rights, trans visibility, and the spectrum. And I think this is the representative of the LGBTQ identity.
Let me talk about LGBTQ activism. Where do you see that heading? Like, what form is it taking? You do it in the way of filmmaking. We're seeing Olivia doing it with, cycling and showing people parts of Taiwan and trying to spread the message that way. Where do you see activism now heading? How would you like to continue this activism, perhaps in your realm, to kind of engage other communities or other parts of the world in opening their minds up and acceptance of the LGBTQ plus community?
I think this is a really good question. I think now we all struggle, what's going to happen in the next. I think it's for me, I think it's really important activism also we have to, getting a trust with other activists, with other issues. It's just sometimes we cannot just bubbling in our own issue. So we also have to get know a little bit on for example, the environmental and other human rights issues. I think as activism, we have to connecting with all other part of human rights issues. And then in that moment, we can, we were not just focus on one, we also helping each other to bring the issues to all other part of activism. So that's kind of make us understand, okay, because in the end, we want the world is not just not just LGBT, okay, we have all just LGBT equality, but we don't care about women's rights, or we don't care about disability rights, or we don't care about environment, or we don't care about a labor law. So I think in the end, I think for me, activism, we always have to do our thing, but also we have to connecting with other issues. We have to understand is this war is not just about us. It's about everyone.
And the word that comes to mind for me, Xiaogang, is the holistic approach. And I believe, Olivia, that's totally your approach. Can you tell us more, or as a final word, can you give us a sense of what our holistic approach should be towards activism here in Taiwan, and perhaps to other countries also to open up and for acceptance of the LGBTQ plus community?
Sure. So I feel like as part of the Asian heritage, and we think about ourselves as an individual, and then it gets expanded into family, our career, our society, or the world, and then that expands from a micro universe into a macrocosmo. And I feel like when we ourselves take accountability for who we are and define that, and we begin to learn and really take care of those that are around us through love and acceptance. And when this view is being instilled in everything that we do, then love, respect, understanding, camaraderie, all these like good values, they just show up. So this is what I see for a holistic society that is both embracing and really understanding and appreciating diversity.
What a beautiful way to end the show. So I want to say a huge thank you to both of you. Olivia Wu, director and co-founder of Asia Rainbow Ride, and Xiaogang Wei, director and founder of the webinar Queer Comrades. Thank you both so much for your time and for sharing your thoughts with us. And to our viewers, of course, it's been great to have your company. Stay inspired, stay proud, and stay connected.